Hello and welcome to another episode of the Hypertrophy Odyssey. It is the last day of the week, aka the Big Bang Attack workout. I'm feeling very good right now, very excited for this workout. But anyways, to the main subject matter for today. Life usually goes either one of two ways, a tragedy or a comedy. So the main reason why I want to discuss this is because in the previous episode right here, I talked about the ends justify the means or the means justify the ends, and that entire idea of it in and of itself, and how at the very end I started talking about that really life is just divided between a comedy or a tragedy. So the main reason for why I believe something like that is because I think that fundamentally this comes from the idea that Shakespeare kind of came up with a long time ago, where the plays were either a comedy or a tragedy, and that was it. And I think that that is truly a way or a sign in a certain vein in the unconscious mind that he kind of accessed, that all of a sudden it reveals a very honest truth about all lives, I think. And it's an interesting thing to think about, especially because something that we don't really know or have options for. And two, it's interesting to think of life in that scope, because then you could really look back and reflect as to what is your life. So in today's episode, we're going to be looking at both sides of the spectrum here, trying to figure it out as a collective here, because I think that if you try to at least figure it out early enough in life, you can prevent it from becoming a tragedy and making it a comedy. But also as well, there will be tragic moments in a comedy. These things happen. So it's like a weird, you're going to have to find out which one you want to do. But also as well, you can't really choose it in a certain sense. Sometimes life chooses it for you. So in today's episode, we're going to be looking at that and a lot of other stuff that goes within that realm when we get to Mother Base.
All right, so started this day off with a single arm lat pull down, which is pretty good. But anyways, back to the main subject matter for today. Life is either a comedy or a tragedy. So the main reason why I want to discuss this is because, like I've said in the previous episode, or just generally speak, this is something that Shakespeare has kind of tapped into the essence of, that is life, and kind of made it so that this is a relatively true statement. Unfortunately, that's really how the world boils down to. Obviously, we would hope and pray and want, and some people need to hear the stories that are comedies, as we would love to be able to say that we were in a rompous joyride with ups and downs, left and right, and all these other things, in order to allow ourselves to have a interesting, distinguished adventure that might have a happy ending, might have a neutral ending, or might have a sad ending. And that's the thing. Usually, most of the time, the comedy will have the good ending, or at least an ending that is satisfactory with the context within of its story. The issue with something like a tragedy is that most of the time tragedies, will usually end terribly, and by that case it's just usually some type of either forewarning, things going awry nonstop, or just the tale of someone who could have been so much more but was unfortunately unable to become that much more, whatever reason that might be. And I think that happens a lot with people, whether they like it or not. The tragedy that becomes their life becomes more of a learning lesson for others around the world, or around them in their own world. And I think that sometimes that ending is truly chosen for some, and it really sucks, because if you think about it, mostly the ending of stories will really determine what it is. It can be a comedy all the way until the end, where it gets really dark, or the other way around, where things going awry, but at the end of the day it might be a little bit better. And this has what the influence of an ending might be, which I made an episode about a long time ago. I might make another one because it is a very interesting concept to me in general. But generally speaking, the comedy, the tragedy in this case, is usually something where people can learn from these people. People can understand and see the suffering and the pain. And sometimes it might get a little bit better, but most of the time these things will end in what is essentially loss, or some type of pain and guilt, or whatever negative emotion you'd want to think of it as. The closest it'll get to something being okay would be a bittersweet ending, where somebody has some type of epiphany, but it might be too late in their life. So maybe now they get a second chance, but unburdened with the past guilt or past of themselves in going forward. I think that it's important to remember this, because I think that the dynamics between the two go hand in hand, where both are intertwined, but truly depending on where things are, the trajectories of up and down really do depend on what happens in your life. And I think sometimes tragedy is one of those things that you can't avoid, even if your life is a comedy in a certain sense, where there will be tragic moments, because without it, we can't bring the levity of the comedy. You can't always keep going up in a story. Same with the going down, of course, that is there, as above, so below. It always works out in that sense. But as well, this isn't necessarily one-to-one. And most of the time, even going up in a story that is tragedy might just be getting to baseline. And even that might be just the bare minimum of something a little bit more out there. And I think that that's one of the things that Shakespeare really tapped into when it came to these stories that to this day are still timeless. And I mean, people still are remaking these stories over and over again because they somehow tapped into the core of people, really. I mean, something like a Romeo and Juliet, the idea of young romance, tragedy amongst those families that are warring. These things happen to this day, cultural differences, relationship differences, regional differences. All these things happen to make it so that these things where between two people that dislike each other can make it so that these people can bring them together, or the other way around, the family to split apart, to go away from each other. It's a very sad thing, but that's the main thing about these types of stories, is that you hope that and pray that you can try to do your best to make it so that you are living the comedy, but always brace for the idea that maybe your life is a tragedy, and hope to God it's not.
And we're back. Welcome to the workout debriefing. Exercises not filmed, none. Exercises skipped, also none. Got everything in, thankfully. But anyway, back to the main subject matter for today. Life is either a comedy or a tragedy. The main reason why I wanted to discuss this is because, like I said, I mentioned it in another episode, but it is something that I feel like is very accurate in life. Unfortunately, there are times where the tragedy aspect of the world will just be thrown upon you, basically. The world will make it so that your life story ends up becoming a tragedy. And unfortunately, there's not much you can do about that. It's just something that kind of happens. And at that point, you can't really do much because, well, that's unfortunate, right? And there are other things like that where life will throw you those curveballs. But the thing is, there are things that you can probably do in order to avoid these types of things. There are people who get addicted to certain drugs or gambling or sex or something along those lines that make it so that their lives are ruined by certain rabbit holes. And then these rabbit holes really just make it so that what could have been a promising comedy ends up becoming a tragedy. And sometimes these things aren't necessarily the end-all be-all, of course, because sometimes there are times where people do all these things and they have a rompous time and they live until they're 85 or 90 or whatever and have a good life, even though they've done all these crazy things, and it's all just a weird comedy that is centered around them, of course. Of course, there's always tragedy in some, but at the same time, it always happens. You can see this in movies as well, where there's always at least some type of sad moment in any type of comedy or any type of thing like that. I think of instantly Donnie from The Big Lebowski as the sad aspect of it, the tragedy. But these two aspects that go along together, I think, are very accurate in describing a lot of the way life is. And I think that if you don't start living the way that you would want to in a comedy, where things are going well, where you're having a rompous adventure together with friends and family, whomever you want to have adventures with, think of it as silly, fun fair, that type of stuff, or just jokes for yourself, making yourself laugh, whatever it is. I think that if you're not living that life will end up throwing the tragedy towards your way and making it so that you have to become the tragedy in others people's lives so they can learn from your life, which is a terrible thing to think about, but also really that's probably how it works out, really. If you don't play around with the universe and have fun with things, the universe will throw you for a loop and cause you pain and destruction more likely than not. It wants to teach someone somewhere a lesson, and thus it makes it so that things like comedy and tragedy end up becoming the basic ways that you could think of your own life. Now, of course, there are people that are going to say that there are more, intricate things, all of these individualized types of stories where maybe you are a boring story, or maybe you're a romance or something along those lines. But you have to understand that these elements happen within those elements. So, for example, there is romance romance in tragedy. Something like a Romeo and Juliet is a tragedy, but there was based off of the romance. If you look at something like a comedy with romance, you could just look at all the rom-coms that ever existed, basically. All of those things, or Taming of the Shrew if you want to go Shakespeare. But the thing is, it's a comedy that it involves, at the end of the day, either one of these two factors, really. And I think that a lot of people don't want to think about that, because really, if you do truly focus on it and really like just harbor on the idea of only doing one thing, like making sure everything is good in life, then you're going to get into pitfalls when things don't go well. I mean, even in something where things are just jolly and wonderful without any tension, there is no story. So it kind of is a balancing act in a certain sense, but at the same time, you kind of want to make sure that you're in the driver's seat at least somewhat, you know, make sure that someone's behind the wheel back there, just in case, because there are some people who are behind the wheel, but no one's home. So then life just kind of takes it for them. So it is something to think about. But with that being said, tell me your thoughts and opinions about this one. I would love to know if you have any ideas or any stories about anybody whose lives are either or in your life, because I would love to know what your thoughts and or stories about that. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Please share this video with anybody who may or may not like it. I will be back on tomorrow with a new video. Thank you very much for watching. I really do appreciate it. Keep it heavy, stay safe out there, and stay cool. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace.